Hi, it's Harry Mills, and you are listening to the 360 Entrepreneur Podcast with Jan Ilunga.
This is episode 198, and today we talk about using self-persuasion to supercharge your sales. Here we go.
Welcome to the 360 Entrepreneur Podcast, the show for entrepreneurs and small business owners who dream big and want to do bigger. Join some of the world's top entrepreneurs, internet marketers, and best-selling authors as they share their inspiring stories, their struggles, and give actionable tips that will help you build, grow, and promote your online business. Here's your host, Yanni Lunga.
Hey there, how's it going? How's your week going? I'm doing great. Actually, yesterday I got to speak at a very fun conference not far from Helsinki at a university. I talked about podcasting and I did a Facebook Live on the Facebook page, on my Facebook page. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I'll link to it in the show notes. Today's episode focuses on sales, and you're gonna hear some advice, some things to think about and do if you want to increase sales. It doesn't really matter what type of business you're running. It doesn't really matter whether you're selling products and or services, because the advice of today's guest expert, Harry Mills, applies to pretty much any type of business. The show notes for today's episode are over at yanilunga.com/episode 198. All right, time to get started. Here's the interview with Harry Mills from ahaadvantage.com. Today, we are joined by an internationally recognized expert on sales, negotiation, and marketing. He's the CEO of the AHA Advantage and the author of several books. Today, you'll hear more about his latest, which is called Zero Resistance, The Science and Secrets of Supercharging Your Sales by Eliminating Buyer Skepticism and Mistrust. It's with great pleasure that I welcome on the show Harry Mills. Harry, how's it going?
It's fantastic. It's lovely to talk to Finland.
Nice. And you are joining us from New York. I think the first question I have to ask you, Harry, is if you could take a moment to tell everybody a little bit more about the story of the AHA Advantage. So what is the AHA Advantage?
Well, the AHA Advantage was really written in response to a problem that's occurring in all sales environments. Mm-hmm. We live in a world where buyers have access to cell phones and other what I call Google-driven technologies. Mm-hmm. And those technologies give them increased power. It gives buyers unlimited information and access to multiple choices. And whenever buyers have increased power or influence, they change the way they deal with whoever tries to influence them. So what I realized was that resistance was increasing in all sorts of sales markets. You only got to be on the high street and watch people shopping with their cell phones. And in the business-to-business market, buyers are becoming increasingly resistant, mm-hmm. and they're pushing back on traditional sales techniques. And back in 2000, I'd written a book called Artful Persuasion, which had led me to be appointing the Harvard Management Mentor on influence. And I'd written about a subject called Self-Persuasion. Mm-hmm. And the way to understand self-persuasion is to think of a car in which you need both oil and petrol to drive it. And you need the oil in a car to remove the friction. And when you remove the friction, it allows you, the driver, to put your foot on the gas pedal, as the Americans call it, and use the thrust that's provided by the petrol or the gas. Mm-hmm. So the question really for us now in sales is, how do we effectively find the oil in our relationship so we can lubricate the relationship and eliminate the resistance? And the second part, which is the aha, what are the ahas or insights we have to use with clients so we can convince them that we can deliver more for less. What customers are looking for increasingly in a world with their cell phones is they know they can get faster, better, cheaper. And it's the salesperson's job today to convince them that they have a smarter way of delivering faster, better, cheaper.
Okay, thank you, Harry, for taking a moment and telling us where the concept of the aha advantage, your company, comes from. And you said it, we have to really think about the way we sell. And I know in the book, so your new book is called Zero Resistance, The Science and Secrets of Supercharging Your Sales by Eliminating Buyer Skepticism and Mistrust. You talk about some of the things you just touched upon. And I think the first question I want to ask you, Harry, related to something you talk about in the book is why you think entrepreneurs and businesses have to rethink the way they sell?
We simply don't have a choice. Basically what we're doing is that the techniques that we used in the past, called direct persuasion or tell and sell is basically trying to persuade people with information, evidence, facts, statistics, and then we follow that up with a persuasion don't work anymore. People push back and they resist and they're more skeptical. And what's actually happening all across the world is sales productivity is dropping dramatically. So we have no choice. We live in an environment where the buyer or consumer has more power than ever before. It's the first time in history that the buyer, if you like, holds the trump cards.
So what would you say, Harry? What are some of the things that need to be done in order to not only rethink, but reorganize or recreate what the sale process looks like?
Well, I think what you need to understand, there are actually two ways of convincing someone to buy. There's the traditional or direct persuasion where you try and convince them why they should buy from you using facts, reasons, and other forms of evidence. That no longer works because humans are wired when they're empowered to push back and resist.
Right.
Now, that's the bad news. Right, that's the bad news. The good news is there is actually a much more effective way of influencing, which is called self-persuasion, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but what it means is that you help buyers discover their reasons for wanting to buy for you. And when people discover their own reasons, they don't resist. Why don't they resist? Because we don't argue with our own reasons. And because we're uncovering our own reasons, they become our motivators. So when you use self-persuasion, buyers commit more quickly and they commit for longer. So we're in a bad news situation, but the answer is that you can actually change the way you influence and you can build deeper relationships. And so self-persuasion is one of those miracles, really, because it's been something that's been around for a long time. And when I say around for a long time, scientists of various description have been studying the power of self-persuasion over direct persuasion, and they've been proving that it's more powerful in virtually every instance. So, for example, scientists have used it to reduce racial prejudices in classrooms. They've used it to make aid programs dramatically more successful in Bangladesh. They have used it on AIDS programs to HIV, so people will practice safe sex. One of the most successful examples is from a gentleman called Dr. Michael Pantalon, who's a University of Yale psychologist. And he was asked by the doctors at the accident and emergency section at a local hospital. Could he help them with all the drunks who come in on a Friday and a Saturday night inebriated? And the same people were turning up time and time again. And they said, Michael, please help us convince these people, these drunks, to change their ways, to change their habits.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael said to them, well, I can do that, but how long have you got? And they said, 7 minutes. In 7 minutes, right? And Michael set up a self-persuasion program, and he was able to achieve a success rate of 50%. Now, that's an extraordinary, that's now actually a standardized treatment which is used in hospitals all across the United States. So self-persuasion is just absolutely remarkable. The guru of self-persuasion is a guy called Elliot Aronson. And if you go to YouTube, you can look up the power of self-persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
I've never met Elliot, but I partially dedicated my book to Elliot because he inspired the book. In 2000, I wrote a book called Artful Persuasion, in which I had a chapter on self-persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised about 3 years ago when I searched to see how many people had adopted self-persuasion, and it was hardly any. And I was intrigued. And then it suddenly dawned on me that, Jan, what influences what entrepreneurs need is they need a process. Traditional selling, direct persuasion has always had processes. Most of us in marketing were raised with processes like AIDA, attention, interest, desire, action. Most of us have been trained in sales programs where step 1 is build rapport,
Mm-hmm.
step 2 is uncover needs, step 3 is propose a solution, step 4 is close the sale. Now, what I realized is that what sellers, entrepreneurs, influencers of all type, they needed a process which would take people from no to maybe to yes. And that's what my book does. And what I found is that once people have a process and once they understand how to use the tools in it, self-persuasion works remarkably effectively.
So what would you say, Harry, if somebody's here with you and I, and they're like, okay, I get the idea or the mind shift that's necessary. What are some of the steps entrepreneurs and businesses can take? I mean, you stressed the importance of self-persuasion, and do you have any advice or perhaps have any examples of, I don't know, some of your clients or somebody like that who have applied different steps to the way they now sell? So they basically have changed their entire selling experience.
Well, let me just walk you through some of the steps in the process, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The first step I call it build an empathy bridge with a client. Now, most of us know that first impressions are important. So how do you eliminate resistance at the very first meeting? Because if you can form deep trust. Now, the inspiration for the title of Empathy Bridge actually came from Nelson Mandela.
Okay.
In fact, I'm going to entitle my next book, Mandela's Secret. Now, what Mandela learned on Robben Island while he was being imprisoned is that he could even take an Afrikaner guard who was convinced that he was an native African terrorist to dissolve resistance and build respect. And how did he do that? Well, the essence of building an empathy bridge is to establish similarities with your client, to find some deep commonalities. What the human brain is doing is we're wired when we come across people for the first time, we naturally lean to people who we know.
Mm-hmm.
You'll meet Finns and you'll strike up a conversation and you'll quickly find things that you have in common. I can stumble across a Kiwi in Oxbridge and London, and within a couple of minutes we will know 2 or 3 people
right.
back in New Zealand, right? And the relationships deepen. Kiwis go to London, and who do they end up flatting with? Other Kiwis. Who do they, after living in London for 2 or 3 years, they marry other Kiwis? Then they return home, right? So this bond of deep similarities, what Nelson Mandela was able to do was to convince people who thought that Black Africans were utterly different, that they had a lot in common. So whenever Mandela met an Afrikaner, he started to speak fluent Afrikaans. Now, just the act of speaking fluent Afrikaans blew the average Afrikaner away. They couldn't believe it. And then at the time, most Afrikaners were convinced that the African nationalists wanted to throw the Afrikaner out in South Africa and return them back to somewhere like Holland, where they originally came from. But Mandela would remind people that Afrikaners and Black Africans had a lot in common. They were both people of the land.
Mm-hmm.
They both shared a common love of the land, and the future of South Africa had to be a future where both worked and shared a future together. So understanding how to build a common relationship based on similarities deepens your resistance very much. And when I've got clients and they really search out the commonalities, right, they find that the relationship deepens much more quickly, and they find a risk. And if you think about it, we are now all communicating, selling, and influencing in a world where we're dealing with multiple cultures, for example. And so we have to think about this. We have to find what one of the endorsers of my book, Adam Grant, calls uncommon commonalities.
Mm-hmm.
You and I, you're Finnish, I'm Kiwi. We're at opposite ends of the world, theoretically. But I'm sure that if we sat down, we would find that we've got lots of things in common, right, and we could become very deep friends. So that's the first thing, is build an empathy bridge. And I've got a formula which makes it easy for clients to adopt, and I call it SOFTEN. Smile, adopt an open posture. The F is familiarity, establish similarities. The T is touch, shake hands, and then eye contact and nod. And once you give people that basic framework for establishing an initial relationship, they bond with the client much more quickly. Then the next step is, once I've actually made a connection, what is the communication that I use to demonstrate to a prospect that I can deliver more than my competitors? And the essence of what I say to my clients when we train them, and I say, is every business today is looking for smarter ways of faster, better, cheaper. And I repeat that. Every business is looking for smarter ways of delivering faster, better, cheaper. So you need an answer to that. You need to have an aha conversation. You need to be able to convince people that you can deliver that, because that's what makes you different. And what you've actually got to be able to do in that conversation is convince the client that you can do what I call the 3Ds, that you can do something that's different to your competitors, that you can do something that's more desirable than your competitors. And desirable is normally something that a client will pay more for. And you also need to convince them that you can deliver. The essence of trust and deep rapport is we look for people who are competent or expert, but we also want them to be able to deliver. And it's wired for us back from Stone Age times. Once we came across a possible ally in the tundra, maybe in Finland, right, and we thought of forming an alliance, I not only want to be able to trust you, I also want you to be able to deliver on what you're promising.
Right.
So if we're forming a military alliance, I want you to be able to fight. Right. So how do you do that? The self-persuasion technique is a story, a convincing story, not facts, evidence, argument. It's a story. And why do we use a story? Because a story, I listen to challenge your ideas if you tell me a story. I actually am captivated by the main character, and I identify with the character so I don't push back. And so what I've already done is I've actually, right at the beginning, I've established deep rapport, and I've used a story to actually establish what I can do and deliver on faster, better, cheaper. So what I've done is I've done that. I've done two things. I've established, if you like, I've eliminated resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But if I've told a good story, that the story will be an aha story. So I start to deliver value multiplying insights. Now, as the relationship progresses, typically a salesperson of some form will ask questions. Now, I have a questioning framework which I call a pep talk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the P stands for problem,
Mm-hmm.
the E stands for effect, and the second P stands for possibilities. Now, when most people ask people about a problem or a pain point, right, they make the mistake of coming up and say, I've got the answer, I've got your solution.
Right.
Right? And so what do? We push back at it. But my questioning sequence is built around a self-persuasion technique. So we discuss the problem, we discuss the consequences or implications of it, so we explore it in depth. But I don't tell the client, here is my solution. I ask them to consider and imagine some possibilities and ways of possibly selling it. Because if I say to them, can you imagine if we were to do it this way, what it would mean for you? Or imagine if we were to do it this way, what would this mean for you? Again, it's self-persuasion. It's you imagining. And the interesting thing, let's imagine this is the end of the conversation at our first meeting, Jan. Basically, 5 or 6 weeks later, you will still remember what you imagined.
Right.
But if I actually presented you with information, you would have a tendency to forget it within 5 or 6 hours. And then basically we walk through the sales process. And then we walk through a process. And then basically we have tools which allow people to flesh out what the nature of the problem is. And then I'll just come through to establishing commitment. And the traditional way of committing people in a sale is to actually do what we call a close. And most closing techniques in traditional talent sell selling mean narrowing client options. But using self-persuasion, it's the exact opposite. I say, Jan, I know what I'd recommend, but it's your choice. It's always your choice. Now, Jan, what do you think the chances of closure go up if I push the responsibility and the choice back to you?
Good question.
The remarkable piece of research is that when you say it's your choice, you double the chances of getting a successful close. That's actually been done. There have been 36,000 separate studies done on that. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's your choice. And let me just finish with a negotiation technique, mm-hmm. just to show how rich the set of tools are. Typically, we still may find ourselves chasing a larger sale, and we know the client will be considering an offer from someone else. So we're in what we would call a competitive bid. So how might we increase the odds of still winning the sale? We just don't submit a single bid. We submit what we would call multiple equivalent options. And what it is we submit not one, not two, but 3 pricing packages, all the same value, but with different range of choices inside them. And that increases the chances of closure by another 28%, according to the research. So what you're doing to the client is you're not just saying, here is my offer. You're actually saying, here is my offer packaged up in 3 different parts, all of equivalent value. It's your choice. So what we've found is clients have just been delighted. I mean, what's actually happened, first of all, they get in early, which is the huge advantage, because people who get in early get the chance to influence by criteria. They get the ability in a large sale to get into the relationship early and then be able to use the various tools to build consensus amongst a buying group, which is very important in a big company. And the third thing is you increase the closure rate quite dramatically. And so customers actually change the way they look at you. They don't see you as a seller. They see you as a helper who's committed to helping them achieve success in the long term. And isn't that what we all want?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. And so, Harry, if, just to make it clear for everybody, so what you're saying is that when it comes to the whole self-persuasion framework, we have to think about it from start to finish. So from the way we use storytelling, from the way we present a product or a service, from the way we present our pricing options. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And let me just give you a piece of good news for everybody. Some of your listeners may think that, I'm having to develop a new skill here, and it might be as difficult as switching from ice hockey to field hockey, right? And what we've found, which is I've been delighted, is the novice at self-persuasion is very successful. Why are they successful? Because even though you may stumble and fumble your way through the conversation as you're struggling to master it, people don't punish you for it. Customers are still responsive to you because you're helping them. They can readily work out your intent, which is honourable. And because they're thinking about their reasons, they don't push back. So what we actually found is that beginners still enjoy good success because they're not generating resistance. Whereas for many years when we trained people in direct persuasion, we would try to continually polish them up so they were more fluent.
Okay.
That's not as big a issue with self-persuasion.
Okay. And Harry, let me ask you a question. When it comes to self-persuasion, how and self-persuasion and social proof, we often hear the importance of social proof. It's also something that you touched upon when you said that, people are looking for somebody that, they can rely on, that is, that delivers on his or her promise and so forth. So when it comes to social proof, for example, if somebody is selling, let's say, a product online and they have a couple of testimonials and things like that, if we still think about self-persuasion, what should the quote-unquote content of those testimonials be, or what direction should those testimonials be? Should those testimonials be, again, more directed towards storytelling? So, for example, a customer, a person who who talks about how he or she went through a transformation. So before using your product and after using your product, or?
I think it's a very good question, that. If you're getting people to write a testimonial, and it might be part of a brochure or collateral or a thing, having them write it as a story. So there's actually a story framework where they come in and they face a particular challenge. They go through a period of despair where they can't solve the problem, and then involve you in the choice. That's the best way of getting them to write a testimonial.
Okay.
If you're looking for a testimonial that's more like a book endorsement or something that's just 2 or 3 lines, instead of statements, sometimes something that's got a question and then an answer works better, because the question actually makes the person pause.
Okay.
One of the endorsers on my book, other book related at this time called Secret Sauce, starts, think you understand persuasion? Think again,
Okay. I like that. And Harry, we have covered quite some ground here. And some of the things we've talked about are discussed in your new book, Zero Resistance, The Science and Secrets of Supercharging Your Sales by Eliminating Buyer Skepticism and Mistrust. You shared with us the 3 Ds: being different, desirable, delivering. You shared the PEP principle, so problem, effect, possibilities. And we mentioned at the beginning of the interview your company, so the site is Aha Advantage, so I'll make sure to link to that and your book as well in the show notes. And Harry, if somebody would like to connect with you, what would you say is the best way to do that?
I think they can send me an email at harry.mills@ahaadvantage.com.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for sharing that. I'll add it to the show notes page. Is it okay for you?
That's fine.
Okay. And to wrap it up, Harry, do you have any final words of advice, any final tip, anything else you want to add when it comes to packaging the message for a persuasive punch?
I think basically just use the car analogy. Think oil and fuel. Oil, self-persuasion, eliminate the friction. The fuel is your value proposition, and the language I use, look for value multiplying insights that help clients go faster, better, cheaper.
Okay, perfect. Harry, thank you so much for being here on the podcast, sharing your expertise and for telling us more about some of the things your new book, Zero Resistance, discusses. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
And we are back. It was a very interesting conversation with Harry, and you heard him. Self-persuasion, it's so powerful. So if you're maybe crafting a sales page right now, or even a landing page for that matter, what Harry shared here with us applies to landing pages as well. You want to start leveraging self-persuasion to have people take the action you would like them to take, whether that's signing up for your email list and downloading something, or purchasing a product and or service you're selling. A final reminder, the show notes page with the links to everything Harry and I have talked about, including the link to his book, Zero Resistance, can be found at yanilunga.com/episode 198. Next week, the last episode in the hundreds, episode 199. Next week, we're going to talk about copywriting for podcasters. Really, really exciting topic.
Thank you for listening to the 360 Entrepreneur Podcast. For more tips and tools, head over to www.yanilunga.com.